Good afternoon. My name is Jon Mathewson. I'm the curator here at the Dorset Historical Society in Dorset, Vermont. And I'd like to thank you for joining me for another one of these short talks about an item from our collection. Today, I'll show you several items, but they're centered around this nice little pamphlet from 1928. It has a hand-painted cover by Carl Ramsey, a local artist, and inside is a book called The Dorset Trail by George Holley Girlbert, published in 1928. And what follows is, with photographs, a description of the Dorset Trail. So you might be wondering, what was the Dorset Trail? The Dorset Trail was something that was created by the Dorset Natural Science Club in the 1920s. It connected the peaks around Dorset Hollow with one long hiking trail. It started near the swimming hole quarry on what's now Route 30, went up to the Gettysburg quarry, straight up, and then over to the east, up to the top of Mount Aeolus, and then northward across all of the mountains there, Crane Hill, Knee Top, and finally up to Dorset Peak. Then it went westward across Jackson Peak, and then back down to the valley into Kirby Hollow, ending more or less where the Long Trail School is now. Now, it's a really interesting story about how this trail came to be. People had been going up to the quarries that are along the trail at least since the 1870s. We have photographs and whatnot of people doing that. And it was a popular series of hikes, but the Science Club, under the direction of George Holley Girlbert, wanted to make it a little bit more formal. And this was the epic of formal trail building exercises. The Long Trail, connecting southern Vermont with northern Vermont along the Green Mountains, was built in the teens. The Appalachian Trail, going from Georgia to Maine through half of Vermont, the bottom half of Vermont, was also being built around this time. In 1914, and this is where, for me as a historian, it gets really interesting, the Bennington County Review, published actually on April 1st, 1914, described the work going on up until then and planned for that spring and summer for the southern portion of the Long Trail from Rutland down to Bennington. And it talks about each section of the Long Trail and how each section was going to be built and where it was going to be, what old logging roads some of it might be on and so forth. Then it diverges into a really interesting thing. The proposed Taconic Loop Trail. The Taconic Loop Trail would leave the Long Trail, as we're going north here, around Arlington or Shaftesbury, go up Red Mountain and Egg Mountain, that whole area, up to Mount Equinox in Manchester, then go up to Mount Aeolus and Dorset Peak and Dorset, and keep going all the way up to Salisbury. Then hook back over and meet up with the Long Trail there. So it would be a huge loop of a trail, and it would all be in the Taconic Range, hence the name, the Taconic Loop. I haven't been able to find out why it was never created, but it was never created. But I think that the seed was planted, at least in George Holley Girlbert's mind, that a trail in Dorset along those lines would be great. And so he got the Dorset Science Club, which he was a founding member of, to dedicate themselves to that. Before that, they had been founded in the teens, and they had been doing things like fundraising to buy a telescope that people could rent out or take out from the library if they want to look at stars and learn about astronomy, that sort of thing. This was a much grander project, and it took them more than 8 years. It was 8 years until this book was published, but more work needed to be done in the Jackson Peak section. During this time, as more and more people, because they were afforded the freedom of the automobile, they were getting out of the cities and into the country. When they were in the country, one popular thing to do was hike. And for instance, in 1924, the Manchester, Vermont Board of Trade, a precursor to the Chamber of Commerce, put out this hike map of Manchester, Vermont and its environs. And it has in it, if you'll bear with me as I open it up, various hikes in Manchester and Dorset. It talks about hiking up to Mount Myrick, but mainly Equinox Mountain and the Long Trail are the major hikes. And Lightbrook Falls, I believe, is highlighted here as well. So there was interest in the air. And then this was published in 1928. And in it, George Holley Girlbert says that to do the entire hike would take about, I think he said 16 hours. And he said that that might not be enough for one day's hike. So if you can't do it in one day, hike it until you get tired, then set up a camp wherever you are, and then continue the hike the following day. This means as you're going on someone else's private property, cutting down twigs and trees to make a lean-to, and starting a fire, just randomly. Not something that many people do today. But that was a recommendation. The trail, as I said, when this pamphlet was written, was completed to the Danby Four Corners Pass between Dorset Mountain and Jackson Peak. And the book does say that you can hike the Jackson Peak section to Kirby Hollow, but it's not as nice of a path as the other parts of the trail. Now, the people who started this and did this maintained the trail for many years. They raised money and they even bought the top of Owl's Head Peak. And then when the club disbanded in the 1950s, they donated that land to the town of Dorset, which it still owns. Also recently, the town has acquired land around Gettysburg Quarry and is actively recreating portions of the Dorset Trail and expanding the trail system as well. And so now you can very easily go from the trailhead to Gettysburg Quarry all the way up to the top of Owl's Head. Other parts of the trail can be kind of traversed. I've been on parts bushwhacking in the middle of nowhere where there is no trail, and all of a sudden I'll find one of the old Dorset Trail trail markers on a tree. I don't recommend you do that. But the fact that they're still there, they used the metal tops of frozen juice containers, and they would nail them to the tree. And they're there, they're rusted, but you can still find them with no trail in sight. To simulate the trail, one good way to do it is to use the old quarry trails on the eastern side of Crane Hill, Kneetop, and Dorset Peak. And then go up to Dorset Peak, and from there, especially once you get to the top of Kneetop, the trail is a very, very well-maintained trail. It's on National Forest land, and they're doing a crackerjack job. And then that goes to the top of Dorset Peak and then down, and you can either try Jackson Peak or veer left and go straight down into the end of Dorset Hollow, as long as you have a ride to pick you up. Otherwise, it's a long, long walk, but a beautiful walk. So it is being recreated in many ways. The hiking opportunities exist in Dorset still, and there is a lot of history. One other quick thing to add is about George Holley Girlbert. He passed away in 1930, and he has a very interesting history beyond the Dorset Trail. He was a defrocked theological professor in Chicago before he moved to Dorset. But that's a very long story. And this is his favorite spot. It was at the time called the Owl's Head Lookout. And this picture was taken of him probably in 1928. And then he died in 1930. In 1932, there was a large ceremony where that was renamed the Gilbert Lookout. And there's a concrete plaque up there commemorating George Holley Girlbert to this day. So, thank you for joining me in the Dorset Historical Society for this talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.